Hello, 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 all you crazy witches. It's Friday, and it's 1:30 in the afternoon, and that means it's time for whiskey. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Joel. We have a mic situated here correctly. There we go, something like that. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name's Joel. It is the ToSalem Friday live show, where we are talking all kinds of metaphysical goodness and other goings on in the worlds of Salem, witchcraft, Halloween, spookiness, and all the things we talk about here on the show. We have a cool show today. We're going to be continuing our conversation for most of the show about this book right here, Chaos Protocols by Gordon White, which you can see there at the bottom. Last week, we basically got up to where we were starting to talk about magic, and that's kind of where we left off. But before we jump into that, I want to do just a little bit of updates and housekeeping and stuff. We are 1 week out from the premiere event of Salem's Ghosts, the Lynn Lady, which is something I'm very much looking forward to. We're going to talk about that more here in a minute. But to get started, let's get started as we always do. This is a toast to you, you beautiful weirdos, to Salem, to all the things we love in the world. It certainly does appear to be a brighter world this week to me. I hope it also appears to be a bit brighter to you. Cheers to you. Let's get weird. That first Friday whiskey, that first sip of the Friday whiskey, I'm not going to lie, it never really gets any easier or smoother. That first sip is always painful. All right. If you got something, step along with me. Actually, speaking of the Lynn Lady, we've got two premier drinks that we are going to be making at the Lynn Lady premiere. One of which is just for anybody who comes, and we're going to start the night showing you how to mix that. The other, though, is a Manhattan-style drink, which is more my speed. And that's for VIPs only. Only way you can see how to make that is via the VIP lounge. The only way you can get access to that is buying a VIP ticket. So, if you're a whiskey fan like me, that might be what you want to check out. Let's do a little bit of a new subscriber shout out before we launch into our convo about the Chaos Protocols. New subs, let's see, we got, this is on the YouTube channel, ToSalem, all one word, ToSalem. We got Mirish Cherry. Who is this? Dana Alkiati. I've heard of this person before, but I've never deep dove. All right. I'm gonna have to check this out. But Mirish Cherry, cool, a bunch of witchy stuff. Hearth Witch, yeah, I know about Hearth Witch. Cool, very cool. Hearth. I actually don't know how to say that word. I always say hearth, but I think it might be hearth. Next up, we got Lisa Simonetta. Lisa Simonetta is into Jamie Oliver, of course, who isn't? Transcending Vibrations. Dr. Michael S. Heiser. Who dat? Oh, is this like a Gnostic Christian dude? Kind of looks like it. He looks cool. Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. What's up? Welcome to the channel. All right, we're just gonna kind of briefly introduce new subs of the week. There's a couple for you, but most of what I want to talk to you guys this week about is the Lynn Lady and Chaos Protocols, which we're about to launch into. So first up, a little bit of updates on what's going on with the Lynn Lady. Hey, if you don't know what the Lynn Lady is, and I keep referencing it, this is something we got going on. Next week, let me pull up the thingy on my thingy here. Next Friday, a week from today, we are premiering the audio series that we've been working on for something in the neighborhood of the last 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. Very, very excited about it. It's a horror-esque kind of ghost story audio series. And sorry for all the clicking. That's going to stop here in a minute, but I want to show you guys this thing. The story is, there you go. There's a little splash page we put together for it. The story is a haunting tale set in 1941 and 2021. We are tracking an unsolved murder and the ghost story that resulted from it. Both the murder and the ghost story are real life events. and then pretty much everything else is fiction. So this is true crimey, it's horror-y, it's witchy, it's ghosty, it's all those kind of things rolled into one. 6 episodes long, probably, like 2.5 hours when you put it all together. It's most of what the night's going to be, but then in between all the episodes, we're also doing live events, featurettes, games, all kinds of cool things to explore. And all of it takes place within a top-down, 2-dimensional, retro-style video game. Yes, you heard that right. We are insane people and built an entire video game to premiere an audio series. And let's jump in. While I'm talking a little bit, just doing a brief update on what we got going on, Lynn Lady, some things that occurred this week. I'll just throw up on screen here, walking around the map a little bit so you can, if you're checking out the stream, you can see on the screen, on your other screen, me walking around the map as I talk about the show. This is the main theater we're currently in. This is where the show is the main show is gonna happen. Up here on the stage, we've got a live Q&A and talk back at the very end of the night with all the cast and crew and everybody. You can ask anybody a question. They'll come up to this little podium and they'll answer the question. This is also where all of the episodes will stream. So that's very exciting stuff. So yeah, the big new news this week is that we have had, in addition to people are starting to come, word's starting to get around. We have got a bunch of sponsors who have signed up to come. Now, basically what a sponsor does is they come, they share the event, and if they're like a content producer in the horror space, the Halloween space, witchcraft space, all that stuff, basically our friends, they can come and they can have a booth at the after party. I won't show you where the after party is going to happen yet, but it's basically like a foresty, kind of woodsy environment with a bunch of cool stuff to do. We got a live DJ for the after party, which is super, super exciting. I'm very excited about that. We got, what else do we have for the after party? We've got exclusive kind of like game events that you can only get into via the after party. I think only if you're VIP as well on some of those, all kinds of stuff. So this is what the world looks like a week from today, 6 p.m. Eastern time. We actually don't know how long it's going to go. The streaming of the episode should only take somewhere in the neighborhood of a few hours, but after that, the after party and just browsing around and stuff, I have no idea. I have no idea. We're going to keep it open as long as people want to be there. You can interact with each other, yada, yada, yada. That's the spiel. There's other stuff on the channel here. Just go search Lynn Lady on the channel if you want like a real deep walkthrough of this entire map and breakdown of all the events and whatnot. But some of these sponsors I want to let you know about that are going to be in attendance at this thing. We got Guts Podcast. Let's bring these people up so you can see them. Well, first we got Thorn Mooney. You all know Thorn Mooney if you are fans of this channel. Thorn Mooney was on the Salem Witch Podcast episode 3, I do believe. Thorn is one of my favorite people out there today working in the world of esotericism. She's an author. She is a history fan. She is a big lit person, a big reader. One of the interview I had with her was one of the best conversations I've ever had on the topic of Wicca specifically, which I actually struggle to have very good conversations about Wicca. But she was a fantastic conversation. She wrote this book down here, These People Are Holding Up Traditional Wicca. Thorn is a sponsor of the event, meaning you can show up and meet Miss Thorn Mooney in person. You can get her book from the night of the event. Let's see here. Who else we got? We got Guts Podcaster coming. They're also sponsoring the event. This is a horror podcast, horror comedy, 3 dudes. Big fans of these guys. And they actually have had me on their show, I am pleased to say. And I don't know exactly when they're releasing that episode, but I know it's before next Friday. So check them out. And if you want to see me on someone else's podcast, I'm on their podcast in the very near future, talking about the Lynn Lady, talking about, what it's going to be like. And they are sponsoring the event, so they'll have a booth there at the after party where you can check out more about them. Check them out if you've not heard their show. They're fantastic. They did a really, really good interview with Josh. Oh, I forgot his last name. The guy who did Scare Me, which is a movie on Shudder that everyone needs to see if you've not seen it. One of the best horror movies of the last year, easily. Fantastic movie. One of the stars of it is the girl from the woman from The Boys who plays the villainous superhero in The Boys, the like dark one who was a Nazi. Ooh, spoiler. That actor who is incredible in that show, is the star of this movie called Scare Me, and she's very, very good in it. And Guts had on the writer-director of that movie. In addition to like people like Henry Zabrowski, they've had a bunch of great people on the show. Fantastic dudes, very underground kind of guys, based in Texas. Really, really cool people. Goons. is what they call themselves. There are people. Check them out. We also have Happy here we go. Happy Horror Coffee Break. I was also on this show recently, although it's not going to come out until after the premiere. This dude's also going to be at the show. He does this really cool podcast where he basically does it's kind of like hybrid audio drama, hybrid Space Ghost Coast to Coast style interviews. So highly edited, funny, interesting stuff. He had me on recently. He's going to be sponsoring the event as well. And then last up, we have What is My Spirit Animal, specifically the Arc Animal Tarot and Oracle deck run by Bernadette King. Going to be in attendance, also sponsoring the event. This deck, by the way, swept a bunch of awards this year. If you're into spirit animals and that sort of jazz, you probably can't do better than getting this deck. I have it over there in the other corner. Very cool deck. Bernadette is also going to be in attendance, talking spirit animals, getting to know ya. So there's some sponsors that are going to be at the Lynn Lady event. And again, that is next Friday. And you can go to ToSalem.com/Lynn-Lady for more information about that. All right. There's all the Lynn Lady updates and all the ToSalem updates. Let's get into the meat, ladies and gents, of today's show, which is continuing our conversation on Gordon White's The Chaos Protocols. Now, when last we left Mr. White, we had just gone through really the first, I would say, introduction and first chapter and a half or so of the book. That's really all we got to. And basically, if you missed the show, a brief catch-up was Gordon talking about fiat currency, talking about the way in which the world financial system actually works, talking about the way in which the bailout, the bank bailout, really did reveal just how colossally dysfunctional and broken the world economic system is, specifically in the United States. And basically talking about how money works and how money is linked to credit inextricably, and how all of this is long-term unsustainable and crumbling and not great. And then backed up against that, talking about the influx of people who are retiring at a volume never before seen in the history of the country, and the economic implications and repercussions of that occurring. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's 14,000 people a day, every day, retiring in this country. And that is going to have a massive toll on the basic, social safety net of the country, and probably obliterate a lot of things that, my parents and grandparents could expect out of their retirement. Doesn't look like it's going to be there for me. So, or people south of 40 probably. So that's where we left off, basically. Where we're going to get into today, we're going to jump into basically where we left off and talk about magic. Today we're going to open up the conversation about magic, because really what this book is about at its core is how to navigate the emergent economic reality we find ourselves in via chaos magic, using chaos magic, and building networks, which we're not going to talk much about networks today. I'm sure we will as we continue talking about this book, via utilizing chaos magic and building networks around oneself, all right? And using the internet and the digital connectedness that we all enjoy for long-term sustainability. So today we are beginning to have the conversation about magic. And to get us started off, I'm going to read from page 45. The beginning of this chapter is called A Probabilistic Universe. And we start out with Gordon saying, success is a head game. More specifically, it is a head game of chance rather than one of skill or strength. If there is good news in the grim story of the previous chapter, meaning all that grim stuff about the economic realities of the world, if there's good news in the grim story of the previous chapter, it is that the entire system is a human construct, an overlay on a probabilistic universe. All right. So just, we're going to be saying the word probabilistic a lot today, because this chapter that we're exploring is very focused on the probabilistic nature of the universe. What is a probabilistic universe? A probabilistic universe is basically that shorthand for saying that the universe works on a system of probability, a gigantic web of interwoven probabilities and algorithms that are so complicated and nuanced and influenced by so many other things happening around them, that is a giant network of probabilistic occurrences, which might occur if X, Y, and Z other occurrences occur, and there's that the entire universe is linked together in this causal chain. That's what we mean by probabilistic universe. Back to Gordon. It is flimsy, a hologram inside another hologram, speaking of the universe. The most insidious way the holographic bars trap you is by convincing you of their eternal physical realities. One of the most practicable ways of breaking out of these bars is through a diligent exploration of consciousness and probability. Matching in lockstep with a centralized, extractive, late capitalist economic system is the religious faith known as scientific materialism. Now, we started talking about this a little bit last week, and honestly, this is something I'll probably talk about on most streams in the future. When people say that there is a firm division between, a scientific worldview and a spiritual worldview, I think that this is what they're actually talking about. And, this whole Dan Brown sort of thing, Dan Brown started with Dan Brown, I thought. That's when everybody started saying it, that science and religion are compatible. Okay, yeah, I guess, but scientific materialism and spirituality, not so sure those things are compatible necessarily. There's a difference in finding the universe poetic and being in awe of a force that you see as conscious and much more complicated and larger and more interesting than anything else in existence. There's a big difference in, isn't it poetic that the world works this way? And I am in awe of the deity and deities that I am in communication with. Big difference in my mind. Anyway, so that's what Gordon is saying. If only the physical exists, then only the physical has importance. Talking about materialism here. If you are just a bag of chemicals, if your brain is the same thing as your mind, if you are simply a meat robot, then despite the lived personal experience of every human who has ever existed, indicating the complete contrary, the worth and value of your life can be precisely measured in physical terms based on the objects you manage to accrue around you. All right, we all know what he's talking about here. He's tying this spiritual worldview that he's experienced or talking about, starting to unpack in the book, back to materialism, back to what we just talked about in the previous chapter with late stage capitalism. He's basically making the argument that plenty of socialists have made, plenty of capitalists have made too, which is that late stage capitalism really only has like a few end games. And the biggest one, and in fact, the one that we all have to be in order for this to keep going, is a near religious or maybe even definitely religious adherence to materialism. Materialism above all. And I'm not just talking about the specific American materialism, which is linked to consumerism. I'm talking about materialism, period, right? Saying that, that the universe is a physical thing and only the physical in it holds value or is real, denying the existence of anything outside of that, to me is just as bad as if not worse, as consumerism. And they kind of are linked to each other. So Gordon is laying out basically that there's a deeper rooted problem within consumerism, which is materialism. And that is basically the way the Western world has been running for the last few hundred years. He then says the hypothesis of materialism is extremely weak. I love that sentence because what he goes on to say, I'm going to say what he says and I'm going to kind of layer my thoughts on top of it. What he goes on to say is that we can disprove materialism very easily, and we have. There are thousands and thousands of well-documented, chronicled, scientifically researched, laboratory conditioned sort of environments, studies, experiments, etc., that prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that certain psi effects, this is Gordon's word, psi effects are real, notably ESP and future cognition. We know because of a myriad of experiments done over an extended period of time, maybe we'll do a live stream one day on just laying out the biggest ones. We know that there are certain psi effects that are unequivocally, materially real. We know this. But the reason that everyone's not screaming it from the rooftops that, oh my God, isn't this cool? Think about what this says about the nature of reality, et cetera, is because if these side effects are materially real, and they are, it unfortunately unravels the materialist worldview that the entire Western world is predicated upon. Unfortunately, right? If you can find nirvana and bliss internally, what need have you of goods, of products, right? This is the very simple, sort of argument that I would lay out here that someone might say is, how this sort of thing unravels Western consumerism and materialism. If all of these things, if everything you need is internal, then what need do you possibly have for stuff, right? It's pretty small. Maybe books. That is all you really need so you can learn how to do the internal stuff. And maybe not even that, So this is where Gordon starts his chapter off, just again reiterating the limitations of materialism, and crucially saying that that Western materialism in general is a very weak argument about the nature of the world. Now, he says that part of why it's weak is because it's so easily disproven. I would add on to that, you guys know I refer to myself all the time as an esoteric utilitarian, which basically means my favorite esoteric ideas, philosophies, and practices are ones that are directly useful. I am a doer. I like to get physically engaged with this stuff. I like to do ritual work. I like to play with these things. I like to make art that's rooted in these things. As you'll see if you come to the Lynn Lady Premiere Friday, it's very rooted in some esoteric ideas. That whole series is. I won't say what they are because that would spoil some stuff, but there's some underpinning going on there. I mean, look, the promo card we designed is the Tower card. We designed 3. We designed the Tower, the Fool, and the Wheel of Fortune specifically for this event. So, of course, I'm in agreement with Gordon here that these sorts of ideas are freeing and liberating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what I would also say on top of what he just said about materialism, which is that it's easily disproven, I would also say it's not very useful. Right? So even if it isn't easily disproven, it's not a very useful way to live your life. We've seen these people. I won't mention any names, but we know these people in popular culture who are entirely driven by Malkuth, by this root, by this material thing, these earth people, he says with no small amount of disdain. We know these earthlings. And we know that that worldview only leads to unhappiness, right? I mean, it's obvious. It's stupid obvious why. If you position your happiness and value and worth in entirely external things, then it will always take external things to assert and grow and spotlight those attributes in yourself. Your value as a human being will always be rooted to those external conditions. And that's stupid. Beyond being unhealthy, it's very stupid, because if you're anything like me, you have been at places in your life where there is nothing around you but hell. Like just darkness, grimy crap that you can't see a way out of, and all you're doing is just shutting your eyes and marching forward and hoping that one day you wake up and the hell's a little bit brighter. And I've been there. I'm sure you've been there. When you're in that place, boy, you sure see the limitations of materialism. You really do. Because in those places, there is no external validation. There isn't, because everything sucks. In those places, you have to find it within. So I would say that, why not just cultivate an environment where you're always finding it within? And then you're never put up in a scenario where once you're in that hell, you don't know your way out, because you haven't cultivated that sort of, internal work or those sorts of internal spaces that you need to get out of horrible places like that. So I would say beyond what Gordon says, that materialism was weak, it's also not very useful, or its uses are limited specifically to the realm in which it is present, the material, the technological, that sort of stuff. Which is not to say that we should disregard it, but it is not comprehensive, I don't think, which again makes it weak. So moving on, he's talking about the probabilistic nature of the universe, and he brings up the holographic universe, and he talks about the universe as a hologram. Now, I have a book up here behind me somewhere, this one right here. This is a great primer, Holographic Universe, Michael Talbot. This is a great primer to what the holographic universe is. But I'm actually already going to talk about 2 other books today and read from those. So I won't jump into that. But I did find this on Vox. I think this is a good. Vox has like a little introductory thing into what the holographic universe is, and they say this. They say this is a good introduction of what the holographic universe is. They say the thinking goes like this: some distant 2-dimensional surface contains all the data needed to fully describe our world. And much like a hologram, this data is projected to appear in 3 dimensions. Like the characters on a TV screen, we live on a flat surface that happens to look like it has depth. All right. This is insane. Insane, right? Let's all just, before we dive into what Gordon is talking about by the holographic universe, because it's actually pretty crucial to the way he conceptualizes magic in this book anyway. Let's just take a moment to revel in the fact together that the idea that the universe is the hologram, that you've spent your entire life in a hologram, that you will die in a hologram, is an insane thought. It's very matrixy. It's very out there. It's very simulation-y. And all these things sound cute and fluffy, but are entirely theoretical to most of us, right? Which is to say you can't test it, so why think about it too much? Unfortunately, for all of us who would like to live in that sort of headspace, there's a convincing amount of theoretical, but also some practical evidence that is mounting every day that shows that it's actually looking pretty more and more likely that this is the way the universe actually does work in some fundamental way. And that our understanding about the Big Bang and universe expansion and all of these physical laws are rooted inside of that hologram as well, and that there is some sort of external physics or external rules or laws that we don't understand the nature of that applies to whatever that flat plane universe is from the point from which all the data is drawn. So there's convincing evidence that this is actually legit in some form. There are people who think that what this is a computer simulation, much like the Matrix. There are people more, I would say I'm more this latter bent where I don't know if I'm necessarily down with that as much as I am just, I like the idea of information being sort of compounded in a single space and then extrapolated out into 3 dimensions. That makes sense to me because that is what we have done as a species, right? That's what we're getting better and better and better at that in video games, in augmented reality, virtual reality, computing generally. There's so many things now where we are extrapolating 3-dimensional reality from a very small, physically small 2-dimensional space. I see no reason why that process just wouldn't compound and continue out and out and out and out. Now, why I would say that our reality might correspond to a larger reality, or the nature of our reality might correspond to the nature of a larger reality. I'll get back to that because Gordon talks about that in a bit. So we'll come back to why I would think that that's an okay, logical sort of train to follow. But the point is that the holographic universe is pretty legit. So hard pill to swallow, but it is looking like, maybe physical matter itself. Most of the universe is dark matter. We have no idea what it is. Maybe the physical universe itself, which is to say the universe that is matter, is the the extrapolation, and whatever this dark matter stuff is, which we know is everywhere, is most of the universe's makeup, but we have no idea what it is or how it works or what is in it. There could be life forms in it that work entirely differently, and we just don't know. It reminds me of a Star Trek Next Generation episode where Geordi is like, Geordi gets sick. God, I've got to search my memory for Next Gen episodes. Somebody who's a Next Gen fan, tell me if you remember this. It's like Geordi gets sick from a shadow creature that like sends all these like weird veins all over him, and he ends up kind of turning into one of them. He has like these cat lion eye things, but they're like shadow creatures. They like live in the shadows, and their physical reality is like, if I remember, it's like cloaked within the shadows. So that sort of thing is a pop culture sort of, reference point for something that might actually be real, which are creatures lurking in the dark matter that don't have a physical reality, and therefore we don't know how to detect them, but they are there and they may be everywhere. And we may be the exception to the rule of the universe. We may be the extrapolation of the condensed data points that those things are actually making. however you want to conceptualize it, the point is that it's looking more and more likely that that is something like that is the way that this actually works. So when Gordon talks about a holographic universe and us living in a hologram as really a bedrock place from which to build out magically and spiritually, it's not that far-fetched scientifically what he's saying. It's really not. So let's move on. We start to talk a little bit in this chapter 2. Again, we're in chapter 2 of this book right here, Chaos Protocols by Gordon Way. He brings back up this word probabilistic. Now this is a pretty key feature of the magic that's going to be presented from here on out, and chaos magic in general. And the way that he goes on to describe how he thinks magicians might conceptualize their work and themselves in the modern era, their magical work especially. Okay. If the universe is a series of interconnected systems, let's say, and you can, to the degree that you understand each individual system, you can make some amount of predictions based off how that system will behave when paired up against other systems, and the variables contained in both of those, how those variables might interact with each other when paired up next to each other. If you can do that, and you have a decent enough understanding of the systems, then you can make probabilistic guesses or expectations, or you can make a good prediction of how things will play out, given that you understand a certain set of variables and you are making a prediction on how those variables will work together. So the way that we understand reality, all of us, is probabilistic, whether or not we think about it, because we expect reality to occur a certain way. And the reason why we expect reality to occur a certain way is because we're making probabilistic predictions on a subconscious level based off of our history and our understanding of the world around us. Very simple stuff, right? But we can extrapolate from that understanding that the entire universe works that way. And this is an old idea. An idea that is rooted in the very bedrock of Western esotericism itself. And to talk about this idea, which we really do need a fundamental understanding of if we're going to build out from it. Gordon actually doesn't go too deeply in this book on this idea, so I brought out some others from my bookshelf, and we'll come back to Gordon in a minute. This book is the one we're going to read from, the Kybalion. I've always pronounced it Kybalion. I've heard other people say Kybalion. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm not sure it matters, but this is a fairly recent book. Early 1900s is when this was written. But a lot of what is in it is based off of older texts like this one. This is the Emerald Tablet, and it also contains the Kybalion, but clearly I wanted a nicer Kybalion than this paperback. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. You have likely heard this name, Hermes Trismegistus, elsewhere in esotericism and witchcraft. Hermes is kind of a, I don't know, the way I would describe him is something like a saint almost of Hermeticism. Is that a good way? If you know Hermes, is that a good way to describe it? Is likely a real person or based on real people. But the Hermes that, what up, frackin' Billis and Fracklin? But the Hermes that is referenced in the Emerald Tablet, that supposedly wrote the Emerald Tablet, is not the ancient Hermes. We know this historically. Hermes is more of a figurehead for a set of ideas and a school of thought called Hermeticism than he is like a real dude who did real historical stuff, although plenty of people will reference figures in history which were likely Hermes. Yeah, Eden says, someone say Hermes? I worship him. He's heavily syncretized in many different religions. Yes. Yeah, you see him pop up. I read somewhere one time that someone thought that there was a relationship likely between Moses and Hermes, like a direct relationship. So he's one of these weird figures in the history of Hermeticism and world history where we're not really sure who he was historically, but we see his philosophical, cultural, and magical imprint spread out across many religions and worldviews. And indeed, a lot of the Hermetic principles, one of which we're going to explore more deeply here in a second, go on to be the bedrock of Western religions generally. Or maybe that works the other way. We're not really sure. Maybe they're in the religions first and the Hermetic corpus derives from. It's a debate. People have this debate. I don't want to have it here. But what is important for the conversation here is that there likely was a person named Hermes Trismegistus at some point. He likely was an important historical figure, and he likely did espouse some philosophical something or other that then went on to be, spread out in all these different traditions now collectively known as the Hermetic traditions based off of Hermes. These traditions are collectively bound in what's called the I had a brain fart. The Corpus Hermeticum. There we go. Woof! Went out of my brain for a second. Whiskey's kicking in, man. Eden, he's kind of a god of everything. I think it's interesting as a trickster and a traveler. So many different traditions picked him up. So many different traditions. Yeah, a lot of traditions did pick him up. I think he's a great analog for Hermetic thought, for esoteric thought in general. I think he's like the Green Man or something. He's one of those figures who are simultaneously historical, mythological, cultural, philosophical, and spiritual. He's all of these things. We should all start putting him on our walls. He's an important figure, even if the Corpus Hermeticum didn't actually come from him and was derived hundreds of years later. Even if that's true, you could say the same thing about Christ. All right, so this is not uncommon in the world of religious and spiritual figures. So, point is that the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus introduces some physical laws about the nature of the universe. The second of which we're going to explore briefly here because it correlates to, and again, this book, 1908, if I remember correctly, the Kybalion, but the Emerald Tablets far older, and the ideas that come from the Emerald Tablets far older still. We're talking about ideas of antiquity here. We're talking about old ideas. So this is a very old idea that predates the holographic universe that I was just talking about and that Gordon talks about in the Chaos Protocols. This is from page 71 of this version of the Kybalion, and we're talking about the principle of correspondence. All right, if you have interacted with witchcraft in any way, you have heard this principle espoused in your ritual practice or in whatever books or whatever. This is where it comes from. Here's the principle. As above, so below. As below, so above. That's it. That's the principle. I'm going to read a little bit from the Kybalion for you here, talking about this idea. Again, principle of correspondence. The second Hermetic principle embodies the truth that there is a harmony, agreement, and correspondence between the several planes of manifestation, life, and being. This truth is a truth because all that is included in the universe emanates from the same source, and the same laws, principles, and characteristics apply to each unit or combination of units of activity, as each manifests its own phenomena upon its own plane. All right? This idea, the principle of correspondence, manifests itself in Western esotericism in a lot of ways. First off, as above, so below. That is what, a Wiccan Rede? It's part of the Wiccan Rede or something like that. Like it is an idea that has persisted throughout time, throughout many religions. I think in Christianity, it's you have this is Gnostic. You have the idea of the kingdom of God is within you and without you. You have this idea of things in heaven are the same as things on earth, are the same as things in hell, that the structure of these things kind of all mirror each other. We see this in contemporary mathematics with fractals, right? The interesting thing about a fractal is no matter how closely you zoom into a fractal or zoom out of a fractal, at any point, the pattern of the fractal continually repeats into infinity in both directions. This is a mathematical formula that these fractals are based on, a series of formulas. And we've discovered through various mathematical trickery over the past few centuries that we find these sorts of repeating patterns everywhere in nature, fractal patterns everywhere in nature. So all of this is just lending scientific materialistic credence to the idea of the principle of correspondences, that the way things are here in our reality, in our physical reality, our spiritual reality, our emotional reality, we can extrapolate that that is true on higher levels of reality and lower levels of reality. Now, in Western esotericism, the lowest level of reality is material reality. There's not much lower than that. So basically, we can extrapolate from the bottom level of reality, material reality, these rules that we think will work in larger and larger and higher planes of reality. When I say higher, what I mean here is higher in the tree of life sense. The tree of life is this ancient Jewish mystic idea that you typically see as a drawing. I bet it's in the Kabbalah, and actually I'll flip through it while I'm talking about it so you can see it. The tree of life it looks like a tree with a bunch of different spheres on it. It's not in here. Let's flip. Oh, there, it'll be in Golden Dawn for sure. All right. Tree of Life is this, basically, it's a good introduction of it. It's a table of a bunch of different circles or sephirah. Here you go. That looks like that. Each one of these spheres are representative of a different kind of reality. And these are ascending and interconnected spheres. You see the serpent here winding around all of these spheres. The serpent is actually guiding us on the path through these spheres, right? So if you follow the serpent's path, you're following the journey through these spheres. The highest of which, Kether, is the Godhead. The lowest of which, Malkuth, is physical reality. And then there are all these sort of phases in between. Now, like the tarot, this is meant to be interpreted both mythologically and somewhat physically, both. We're meant to extrapolate from the tree of life that there is a pathway toward divinity and a path from divinity toward material reality, and that to some degree these pathways can be interacted with on a micro and macro level, meaning you can evolve yourself to be something more like a divine state. And you can also apply the lessons of evolving toward a divine state to any given circumstance, or devolving to a materialistic state. So from this basic idea, you see things like the tarot emerge, which are basically telling mythic tales of evolution stages toward and away from divinity. All right. And you see other sorts of mythic storytelling also sort of drawn from these ideas. These are all rooted in very similar places, very similar thinking, and very similar ideas. And they operate in very similar ways. And a lot of them are drawn from the Western Hermetic tradition. And loosely the Hermetic corpus, which is the collection of texts that comprises that tradition. And the principle of correspondences is I would say, the most fundamental in those Hermetic principles. Because without it, it's very hard to get anywhere else. And you need to have some sort of fundamental rule about the nature of the universe in order to start building a scaffolding for understanding or meaning or life in any plane, right? You need to have some basic rules for understanding how the universe works. And the principle of correspondence, I think, I agree with the Hermetic philosophers that it is a fantastic place to start fundamentally. All right, so let's look at chat here a little bit. Have I seen the movie As Above, So Below? Yeah, that's in the Paris catacombs, isn't it? If it is, yes, I have seen that. Very fun movie. Main character says, "As I am, so are my atoms, so is God. As I believe the world to be, so it is." That's a very interesting quote for two reasons. And it actually, synchronistically, Eden, not surprised that you are wrapped up in a synchronicity. It synchronistically dovetails into what I want to talk about next in the Chaos Protocols, which is, look at this quote that Eden put in chat. The first part, "As I am, so are my atoms, so is God." That's the principle of correspondence, right? As I am, as I understand my physical reality, my emotional reality, my spiritual reality, my psychic reality, all of these things that comprise a single human life, your life, my life, we can also derive from that the nature of the universe works in the same way or similar ways, just like the nature of an ant's life works in similar ways or the same way. As time goes on, we discover just how deeply true that is in how many different ways, all right? And then the second half of what Eden says, the quote from that movie, as I believe the world to be, so it is. Now we're talking about things like quantum mechanics, which Gordon talks about in this book. Look, I stay away from quantum stuff. And the reason why is because I don't understand it, first off. And I readily admit I don't. I've read a lot about it, trying to understand it. I don't understand it. I don't like the way people talk about it, especially in esotericism, because I understand enough of it to know that this idea of quantum mechanics that we present in Western esoteric and spiritual circles is wrong. And that idea is that, that the observer of a thing determines the nature of the thing being observed. We distill it down into that very simple idea, and then we reference a few key experiments that we think proves that. Unfortunately, scientific thought has examined these same experiments and come away with a different conclusion, which is not necessarily, again, I don't like talking about this. I'm probably going to get this wrong, what I'm about to say, but it's not necessarily that the observer determines the event as much as it is that the observer influences the event. Whether or not they have any conscious control over that influence is an entirely different matter, okay? And also that instruments, observational instruments, change the physical nature of reality. So it's not just us, right? It's other things. It's the act of observation, period, seems to have a relationship with the physical makeup of reality. Now, what that means about will and what that means about intent and what that means about a creative relationship with the cosmos is, to me, an entirely different conversation that is not a quantum one. I kind of leave it alone at that point. I don't want to go much farther because I don't understand it. I probably can't understand it. And honestly, I find the spiritual, philosophical stuff more enticing anyway. Material reality, scientific, I don't know, what would you call it? Scientific justification is about as, meaningless to me as scientific justification of almost anything. I don't care. I don't care. If it works and it feels good and it's helping me and the people I love and share stuff with and support evolve towards whatever our divine state is, our better state, if it's doing all those things, I'm good with it. I don't need much more. I don't need quantum stuff. So he knocks a little bit of quantum. He also talks a little bit about quantum here in this same chapter. Check that out if that's your jam. It's not really my jam, so I'm going to kind of skim over it. But what I will say is that the reason we're unloading all of this correspondence stuff is because the principle of correspondence leads to two things that Gordon has brought up thus far. One, the holographic nature of reality, right? Let's put a hold on that. We'll come back to it in a second. And two, how magic actually fundamentally works. All right? You need the principle of correspondence to understand both. So, first, the holographic nature of the universe. Well, let's check a chat here. Seems highly convenient that once we observe something, it means the other universe is split off in which the other option still happens. White criticizes this as materialism. Yeah. Like hyper-materialism, right? Because now, yeah, that's hyper-materialism. That's so materialistic, we can now create entire material universes by observing. All right. Cool. So let's talk about first the holographic nature of the universe. Keep in mind, in the back of your mind, this principle of correspondences, that things appear to work kind of similarly no matter which stage of the tree of life or which stage you're encountering these physical, spiritual, whatever things, the rules still seem to apply. Doesn't matter where you look. Now, dark matter, that kind of stuff may be a huge contradiction to the principle of correspondence. We don't know because we don't know how that stuff works yet. But everything else in physical material reality, excluding the quantum, we've seen work this way. And we assume then, at least scientifically, that the quantum stuff probably works this way as well. And the large stuff, black holes and those sorts of things, which are also mysterious, that huge physical structures that seem to elude the laws of physical reality, and very, very small quantum structures that seem to elude the laws of physical reality. It's not that they are actually eluding those laws, it's just that we don't understand the laws well enough to understand how they're working within the overall systems. So we sort of assume that if something looks like it doesn't fit into this principle of correspondences, it's not because it doesn't, it's because we just don't understand it fully. This view on reality, even if you disregard simulation hypothesis, even if you disregard this idea of like a flat plane from which three-dimensional reality is derived, without all that, you're still essentially talking about a holographic universe, which is hologram, basically, is a system in which the very, very small incarnations contain larger and larger and larger incarnations, like those Russian dolls, you know, and each one is the same as the one that is contained within it, and the one in within which it is contained. This is hard language to talk about, especially when whiskey's kicking in. I'm not very spatially minded. So, even if you disregard simulation, we still do live in what we might quantify as a holographic universe, which is what that book I referenced earlier, The Holographic Universe, is talking largely about. But then, crucially, I would say, it also does appear that that other stuff, where data might be localized in a core small space on a flat plane that we don't recognize or know where it is or how it works, but from which all physical reality is mapped, or derived, it does look like that's also true. But either way, it's still a holographic reality. If you assume that you're in a system like that, then it means that things that happen on the other side of the world have a direct impact on your daily life and on the structuring of the cosmos itself. Because a nuclear war in Asia is an energetic event that occurs on the higher level of reality. Extrapolating outward, the same tendencies reoccur on higher and higher and higher levels of reality. So every single event in which you are interwoven in your life has a cosmic resonance. And then the other way around too. Other events out in the cosmos have a personal resonance and impact on you. This basic principle of as above, cosmic events, so below, personal events. As within, personal events, so without, cosmic events. This basic principle of correspondences, which we now know is physically true, not just spiritually true, and it doesn't just appear to be true, it looks like it is physically true throughout the cosmos, is how magic fundamentally works, if you've ever wondered. All right? Now, does that mean that, am I saying that there aren't deities out there who might be listening to you and helping to enrich your life in whatever way it is that you're wanting your life to be enriched? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. Sure, that may be out there, and we don't have great analogs for what that would be on Earth necessarily, other than sort of elemental forces, but that's where that stuff comes from. You know, those elemental forces, godheads are rooted in shamanic ideas, all of them, basically, tribal shamanic ideas, which are very reverent of nature and natural patterns, of weather patterns, of animal patterns, things like that are extrapolated and turned into godheads or recognized as godheads, either way. And then we blow those out into god figures when we introduce, you know, structured civilization and religion into the mix for easier consumption. But we're talking about essentially the same stuff here. We're talking about energetic patterns that we recognize and we want to quantify and bind somehow in our conscious understanding of the world. And so we call it a thing. We call it Mars. We call it Hecate. We call it whatever, right? Now, you can either view the universe that way, or, again, here's my utilitarianism, or you can view those deities as physically, materially extant out in the universe and you having a direct relationship with them. It doesn't fundamentally matter, from my opinion, in the world of Western esotericism, which route you go, because you end up getting the same sorts of results externally. It only matters internally. If you resonate with deity, if you resonate with Godhead, if you resonate with having characteristics that you are ascribing to be more like or wanting to be in communication with, if you resonate with having those embodied in a form that you call a god, then more power to you. Go for it. If you don't, and you just want to focus on whatever those attributes are, sans Godhead, you can just focus on elemental correspondences, astrological correspondences, and that sort of thing, and basically get to pretty much the same place, all right? Or at least that's the thinking. All right, so let's see in the chat. We got a struggle with spatial reasoning, but I can conceptualize a fractal universe. I'm like that too. What is wrong with us? Yeah, spatial reasoning, way over my head, but infinitely repeating patterns, yeah, I get that. Those deities, spirits, elements, celestial bodies are all part of the above half of the equation, in my opinion. Yeah, you could say that as we are, and plenty of people do, as we are, individual and collective identities simultaneously. We are both simultaneously, both separated from each other and connected to each other with our own consciousness and a collective consciousness. I'm talking about the species itself. You could say then that there are higher, quote unquote, levels of beings out there that follow the same sort of patterns, and that you have a pantheistic structure to a Godhead somewhere out there existing. You could say that. And you're totally legit to. And if that resonates with you, it resonates with you. The esoteric underpinning of these ideas is the same, no matter which way you slice it, though, which is part of why I find it so useful to think about the universe in this way. It works whether it's woo-woo or not. And you can point out that even if you remove all the spiritual stuff, we're still looking at a holographic universe. And then once you layer in all the spiritual stuff, now you can work with the holographic nature of the universe, which is the next bit that Gordon gets into. All right, so now that we understand the principle of correspondence, which is crucial to understand how magic actually works and how he talks about magic throughout the rest of this book, let's turn back to Chaos Printicles. Printicles? The Chaos Printicles. What's wrong with me? I'm losing it. The Chaos Protocols. Page 87, we're going to read from here. This is getting close to the end of this chapter. 1 second. I wrote down the wrong page. Of course I did. 78 was probably right. Oh God. I did all this preparation and then it all fell apart. I tried so hard. I got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I apologize. Oh, here we go. Page 57. I lied. Here we go. Printicles. All right. When it comes to navigating, now we're talking about, okay, we understand that the universe works in this probabilistic holographic way. When it comes to navigating, Gordon says, a consciousness-based probabilistic universe for fun and profit, a number of recommendations present themselves. Firstly, lean into optionality rather than charging off after lofty goals from a standing start. And now we're talking about how to do magic. All right, that's the conversation we're starting to unpack here. And when I say magic, I'm not talking, and neither is Gordon, about hocus pocus magic. I'm not talking about Harry Potter magic, okay? I'm not talking about bippity boo. I'm talking about a relationship forged over time between an individual consciousness and an external consciousness, or what is perceived to be an external consciousness. Firstly, lean into optionality rather than charging off after lofty goals from a standing start. I agree. Starting out working with magic to get $1 million is a bad idea. Among other reasons, because if we do live in this integrated reality in which all systems are connected to all other systems, you must ask yourself, where's that money coming from? Are you getting it ethically? Is it ethical to ask a Godhead figure for money that you know will be taken from other people in order to be given to you? These are the sorts of things you have to ask yourself if you're trying to uphold some sort of integrity while working with magic, you know? So you ask yourself those sorts of questions, and you recognize very quickly, as I did, as a lot of people do, that magic as a worldview, which is to say that the universe works on something like magic as a fundamental law, once you recognize that, you then pretty quickly after that recognize that the way that it works is probably way more dense than I want $1 million, X, Y, and Z God, give me $1 million, please. The likelihood that you need to embrace the probabilistic nature of the universe is pretty high in that case. Is it likely that me, Joel, ToSalem guy, is going to get $1 million tomorrow without magic? Just based off the life I lead? No, it's not likely. It's not likely. It's more likely I won't get any money tomorrow. It's not likely. The probabilistic nature of the universe means that certain events that we might want or not want are more likely to occur than others. All right? Let that, with and without magic, that's true. Let that drop into your brain hole for a second. Probabilistic nature of the universe means that even with magic, certain things are more likely and less likely to happen because of the way you live your life and because of the way your life has been built around you by culture and your family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is not something you get to disregard when you start doing magic. Gordon argues that it's the exact opposite, that you need to embrace it, and instead of aiming for things that are 1,000,000 miles away from where you currently are, even if that's where you want to get, that what is better for you to do as someone who's working with the cosmos is aim for things that are adjacent to you, because they're more likely to happen, and the energetic signature that needs to be, pushed in a certain direction for them to happen is much more slight. Double points for you if it's an internal thing you're asking for. Give me the strength to, give me the courage to, give me the perception, give me the different view, give me the I don't know, the energy, give me the presence of mind. These things are not just better because they're probabilistically more likely to occur, more likely that you will be able to change your own mind with a concerted effort over time, with and without magic, again, utilitarianism. More likely, it's not just that it's also that if there are extant energies outside of you that are in some way integrated with your reality and are in some way observing you, i.e. a Godhead, those sorts of energies are much more subtle and much less likely to cause harm to anyone else, and therefore much more ethical for you. And owing to the law of the principle of correspondence, we can then derive that it's more ethical for whatever it is that you're listening to, whatever is listening to you out there in the cosmos. We can draw all of that from the same set of principles: holographic universe, probabilistic universe, principle of correspondence. Okay? So this internal magic, this subtle magic, small, adjacent stuff based on probabilistic occurrences is what Gordon White is going to argue for the rest of the book is the way out magically of the materialistic worldview in which we have so dismally screwed ourselves. In the chat, tweaking probability is way more effective than making big wishes. I'm starting a job next week. Congrats. That's a direct result of a smaller enchantment. I hope leads to a career I actually want. We work with what we're given. Amen, sister. Amen. Yes, work with what we're given. And we shoot for what is right beside us. Now let's take woo-woo out of it. Again, utilitarianism. Let's take woo-woo out of it entirely. Let's just talk about desire and will for just a second. Then we'll get back to Gordon. Is it more likely, I weigh somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 or 168, 170 pounds, 6'2", pretty thin dude. I've always wanted to be like, strong, not necessarily like buff, but I've always wanted to feel what it feels like. It's not even an appearance thing for me. I've always wanted to feel what it feels like to be root chakra, like grounded. I've never been that way in my life. I've always been, in my chart is all water. I'm a water trine. You know, I'm all water, which means I'm all emotional, intuitive, imaginative. You know, that's my nature, and I have to work against it to be more pragmatic and more focused and more deliberate and more analytical. My nature is all emotional, right? Those sorts of people who are very watery, typically have, you know, emotional and psychic and spiritual trouble getting their brains into a place where they have to do something on a repeated basis that is like earthy and grounded, because we're flowy, man. My favorite form of exercise is running. It's the one I do the most by far. It's the one I can't imagine not doing. I have to do it, you know, even now. It's 20 degrees outside, and I ran the day before yesterday. I'm gonna go run after this live stream. It's a huge part of my life. And the reason I like it is because when I run, I listen to music, and I run in the woods and I typically go like in the middle of the day, so nobody's there. It's a public park, but it's in the middle of the woods, nobody's there, and I dance. I dance when I run. I got my music on, and I'm literally like, I'm like move dancing as I'm running, right? That feels so good to me, because I'm the sort of person who alone in the woods will dance, right? And that's more fun for me. And it's something I can commit to every day, finding a new artist to listen to, a new whatever, and going out there and jamming and cranking out 4.5 miles. That takes me an hour roughly to get there, run it, and get back. And I would much rather spend an hour in 20 degrees, a foot of snow, doing that than an hour at a gym lifting weights. Even though the gym is heated, even though the kind of exercise is like way less aerobic and therefore, you know, different. It's not as like endurance-y, you know, it's not as like stamina based. So to me, it's easier in a way than running. It's not as hard physically to get through as running for me. There's a bunch of reasons why I should be into that, but I'm not. So if I wanted to do magical working to be suddenly 200 pounds and all that weight to be muscle, that's a very improbable thing that's going to occur. So what would be a better solution then, if we're taking Gordon's word for it? A better solution, if that's my ultimate goal, would be help me get in the frame of mind where I can commit to 1 day a week of, you know, 100 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 300 squats. 1 day a week to start. Help me get to the frame of mind where I can do that. And then I do that, and I do it ritualistically. I cement it in a ritual that is locked in my memory, locked in my experience. Again, we're removing all woo-woo here. We're just talking about physical reality. And then I do it again. I cement it again, and I keep doing it. And I do it for 2 weeks. By this point, the ritual is habitual. By this point, cutting out the world for a minute to give myself an hour in which to engage in this likely Golden Dawn based ritual that is to help me change into the sort of thinking I need to do this one exercise once a week, henceforth. I'm already giving myself the time to do that exercise via the ritual. I'm creating memories in my mind that are linked to astrological correspondences, elemental correspondences, cool witchy shit that resonates with me. I'm already giving myself that. It's only a small step then to actually do the exercise once, and then continue to do the ritual, and then do the exercise next week. And maybe next month I do the same ritual, but I adapt it. Give me the strength to do this twice a week. And you just build, you build, you build. And the probabilities expand. They change. They gather their own energy. Okay? Now, we can look at this purely from a habitual standpoint and say that all you're really doing is opening up new synaptic pathways in your mind that are going to help you to establish habits that are going to be more beneficial to you and get rid of habits that are harming you. We can certainly see it that way. And I find that there is beauty and poetry in that worldview. But I find that there is true majesty in a worldview which goes a step beyond that and says, no, there's actually something listening. And I am listening to it. Crucial. Two-way path. Two. I'm listening, it's listening. I'm talking, it's talking. I'm talking in my vocal language. It's talking with synchronicities. It's talking with occurrence, with strange occurrence, coincidence. It's talking with things appearing out of the blue that you can't really trace the origin point of. It's still communication, right? So Gordon argues here that probabilistic magic, which is to say magic that is based on what is likely to occur, is a much better starting point for magicians of any background to work than grand magic, okay? He says, take single steps rather than multiple steps to maximize your starting probability. That's the other side of this. If I want to do this exercise once a week, if I want to have that kind of strength, again, we're using very mundane examples here, but let's say I wanted to do that. You can, in addition to taking these small steps toward adjacent spaces, you can also maximize the probability that you'll be successful if you set up your environment in such a way so as to facilitate the sort of thing you want. It's really hard to wake up in the morning and write 2,000 words on your novel if you've not given yourself a space to sit down and write on your novel. If you live in a 200 square foot apartment and you have 3 children and a deadbeat husband, it's going to be really hard to write that novel. Betty, your name's Betty in my imagination. It's going to be real hard for you to crank that out, Betty, love, dear, because you've not given yourself a place to do it. You've not set up the probabilistic environment in such a way to facilitate you being successful. Now, setting up the environment doesn't make you successful, but it sure as hell helps. It helps a lot. I reorganize my office probably 5 times a year. That's because I do probably 5 big distinct projects a year that are all different from each other. That's just the way I am. And every time I want to do one, I reorganize my office to facilitate the energetic flow that I think needs to be cultivated in order to pull off whatever the thing is that I'm trying to pull off. So you give yourself the space, you give yourself the tools, you set up the environment around you probabilistically to encourage your success. Encourage your success. Encourage you landing on that adjacent step. Again, we are keeping magic, we're keeping woo-woo, we're keeping energy entirely out of this conversation for now. Just that is enough. And the entire self-help industry runs on just that. When you start to integrate the idea of correspondence, when you start to integrate the idea of deity, when you start to integrate the idea of energetic resonance, holographic placement, multiple realities all layered on top of each other, it's not hard to then conceptualize how there might be an energetic backing to what we just laid out very materialistically, and energetic repercussions, both internal and external, for your involvement in the world. I think about this week, right? This past week, if you're in the US, how many of you felt, as I did, a little odd after the new president took office? Didn't it feel kind of weird? I know it did for me. It felt like some energetic pattern had been interrupted or changed somehow, or stopped, halted. I don't know what it is, but it felt odd. It still feels odd. I'm cautiously hopeful, but like a lot of people, but it's also like, what is this feeling? Was I just in despair? And now that things are looking slightly better, that despair is being challenged? Or is it something else? I don't know. What I do know, though, is it definitely feels external. It feels bigger than me, whatever it is I feel, because it feels more complicated than I can understand or even conceptualize, really. It feels like something I'm caught up in. If you allow yourself, the space to believe that such a thing might be true for everything in your life, that you are both a prime mover of your own holographic cube and being acted upon by the holographic cubes on either side of you, both above and below you, energetically, it's very easy to understand how you alone contain such galactic, cosmic responsibility. Such massive massive responsibility for the shaping of the cosmos itself. That's the energetic resonance for me. Feeling that responsibility, feeling that sense of metaphysical duty is a huge motivator for me. Huge motivator for me. So, where Gordon leads us into this next chapter, which is called Becoming Invincible, and that's what we'll pick up next time. He leaves us with this last two paragraphs here. He says, human consciousness clearly has an impact on the physical realm, but it is more reliable in a nudging, small, high probability events than bringing down the walls of Jericho by the power of will. I'm going to read that again because I kind of screwed it up. Human consciousness clearly has an impact on the physical realm, but it is more reliable in nudging small, high probability events than bringing down the walls of Jericho by power of will. In a 1901 letter to a fellow Golden Dawn magician, Florence Farr, the poet W.B. Yeats wrote, quote, "Whatever we build in the imagination will accomplish itself in the circumstances of our lives." Whatever we build in the imagination will accomplish itself in the circumstances of our lives, which becomes especially true when you build one brick at a time. And while the bricks get smaller and smaller as you build, the next one, the cornerstone, if you will, is an absolute doozy. And then he leads us into a paragraph or a chapter called Becoming Invisible. So we now have a very solid understanding of the way that Gordon conceptualizes the magical reality around him, the way that he conceptualizes the financial reality around him, the global economic stage. We've laid both of these things out. We have a good bedrock understanding of how Western esotericism generally works via the principle of correspondences. Again, we're going to jump back in on chapter 3 next week, but I highly recommend that you pick up the Chaos Protocols by Gordon White and listen and read along with us. I kind of like this is evolving into like a book club, which I'm a big fan of, obviously. So we're going to pick back up next week, Becoming Invincible, which starts with a Terence McKenna quote. Let's do a little preview. Here's the quote. "The purpose of life is to familiarize oneself with this after-death body so that the act of dying will not create confusion in the psyche." Oh, I love Terence McKenna. "The purpose of life is to familiarize oneself with this after-death body so that the act of dying will not create confusion in the psyche." You ever see someone die confused? I have. I cannot imagine a more painful thing than to die confused. To die without some bedrock foundational understanding of what is happening, what your place in what's happening is, and where you're headed next. To die in a state of confusion, believing that you are going to see another day and realize in that moment that you're not, that this is the day, this is the last day, this is the day you've been building towards since the day you were born. To recognize it all in one single moment. I've seen that fear in someone's eyes, and friends, I've got to tell you, there is no fate worse on earth that I have ever seen in my own life or in the lives of anyone I have ever seen in media, art, anything, books. It is the most terrifying, miserable, horrifying, confined space I've ever seen anyone in ever. It is the last thing on earth you want for yourself. Almost any other fate is better than dying confused. And McKenna, we start that chapter out with a McKenna quote that says that the whole purpose of life is setting yourself up to not have that happen to you. It was a pretty damn good way to live a life. All right, everybody. That's been the ToSalem Friday Live show. In chat, if someone else has also seen this fate, and they're right, there's no fate worse than that. Yeah, I agree. There is no fate worse than dying confused. I've only seen it a few times, but the few times I saw it were people I legitimately deeply loved, and I've never seen them that desperately broken in their entire lives than right before they went. So you got to avoid it. All right, next week, We are jumping into the Chaos Protocols again with Chapter 3. We are going to learn how to become invincible. Everybody, next week, the live show is going to be at 1:30 again. But if you want more of my attention, and honestly, why would you not? You can also come after the live show to the Lynn Lady premiere, which starts at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few hours after the live stream. I highly recommend you check it out. It is a one-night only affair. Sponsors are pouring in. Tickets are being bought. Cats and dogs living with each other. It's absolute chaos. Please do consider coming to that. Use the discount code HORROR for 10% off of the tickets. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm so delighted to be doing these live streams. It is such a thrill for me. I'm so excited to be doing the Lynn Lady. I know some people in the chat are going to be there a week from today. I can't wait to see you there. I can't wait for you to see what we've done and enjoy all of it. I'll see you guys next week for a conversation. I have an empty glass, but I will toast you with my empty glass for a conversation on the Chaos Protocols. You're all incredible. Here's to you with my empty glass. Here's to Salem. Stay weird, witches. I'll see you next time. He said, drinking nothing.